Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We welcome you once again this evening to the airwaves of Salam Media, whatever platform you are listening to us this evening on or watching, whether it's on YouTube or on the other social media platforms. We welcome our listeners, our viewers to Wednesday nights with myself, Inayat Wadi. And once again, unpacking developments right across the entire world, particularly looking at recent developments and we are talking this evening about normalization with the Zionist entity called Israel. Now, over the years, we've seen so much happen by way of normalization. We've seen countries like Bahrain and also looking at Morocco, looking at Sudan, looking at Egypt, looking at all these countries that have now started normalizing relationships with Israel. In the recent G20 summit, where we've actually even seen the Turkish President Erdogan together with Netanyahu. So a lot has been playing out in the background. We know for a very, very long time that many of them have been trading with Israel. We know Turkish Airlines is flying into Tel Aviv. The United Arab Emirates has got extremely close ties with Israel. But all of this playing out, and it was just a matter of time when people were asking who's next. And did this come to us as a surprise, where we know formally it still hasn't happened, but the recent move by Saudi Arabia, and also we've seen statements made by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman with regards to Israel and saying that he's prepared to work with any Israeli prime minister, including Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, all these things have been playing out for a long, long time to the detriment of the people of Palestine, to the detriment of the Palestinian cause. And this is a question that we are raising tonight, that is Saudi Arabia's recent move to normalize ties with Israel. Is it a sincere gesture? Is there more to it? Is it a strategic maneuver to get closer and to align themselves with Israel? But to unpack all of this this evening, we are joined by my two guests. We've got Osama Nazzal, who is a journalist based out in Ramallah, and we also have got Dr. Firoz Osman, a Palestinian activist and member of the Media Network. And looking at both my guests, I see Osama Nazzal. Osama, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Alaikum salam, most welcome to you.
Yes, and also to you, Dr. Firoz Osman, assalamu alaikum, and we appreciate your time.
Shukran. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Yes, Dr. Firoz, I'd like to start off with you. Now, obviously, you've been monitoring these developments with Israel and the Muslim states, the Arab states as well, that have normalized ties with Israel and looking at Saudi Arabia. But we knew that this thing was long coming, and the signs were there all the time. And just your reading into these ties and, what is driving Muslim countries to get closer to Israel?
Yes, I think it's been coming a while now, this move, and it's a lack of understanding of what the aim and objective of Zionism is in the region and so on. The normalization means normalization of something that is abnormal. And this is what has been happening ever since the Zionist entity has been planted into the heart of the Muslim Ummah, into the Arab regions. And unfortunately, the treachery of some of the Arab regimes have been moving closer to them, but they have been having very covert ties with the Zionist regime, and it is for totally selfish reasons. They are, most of them, illegitimate entities, and they need protection because they're insecure in their reign, and they will hitch onto anybody to protect them. It was the British initially, it was the Americans subsequently, and now it is the Zionist entity Israel that is now protecting most of those regimes. You talk about the Emiratis, you talk about Morocco, you talk about Egypt, and now Saudi Arabia, illegitimate regimes that are terrified that the Ummah will rise up against them and, in fact, overturn them. So, I find that besides being covert, they are now daring and becoming openly openly against the Ummah as a whole, and openly against the Palestinians in particular. So this is unfortunate, but it is, as you mentioned, bound to happen. Has been happening covertly, and in many ways, I'm glad it has happened. Uh, openly now, so the Ummah will see the treachery of the Saudi Arabian government.
Thank you for that, Dr. Firoz. And just to bring Osama, and Osama, just the question I had raised to Dr. Firoz Osman, and just your thoughts on how these relationships between some of these Arab countries and Israel have evolved and developed over a period of time.
Yeah, first, thank you very much for having me in your program. If we read into the Israeli politics and the Israeli government plans, we see that the major goal that the Israeli regime has is to subside the Palestinian cause, not only to subside, but to erase Palestine from the map. And we all watched at the General Assembly meeting of the United Nations, the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly, when the Zionist regime Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delivered his speech and he displayed the plan of the land from the river to the sea, marking that it's all Israel, leaving the Palestinians nothing. So the Zionist regime aim is to erase Palestine from the map. They don't recognize the existence of the Palestinian people. And they think that the best way to achieve their Zionist goal is to have normalization with all the Arab world without the Palestinians having any of their rights. And this is really very dangerous and very serious to see some Arab governments rushing towards normalizing relations with Israel. Why? Because no one can deny or ignore that Palestine is the core issue not only of the Arab world, but of the Arab and the Muslim world, wherever Muslims and the Christians are. And we know that Jerusalem is the heart of the Muslim world, and Jerusalem, Al Quds, is not belonging to the Palestinians alone. It belongs to all Muslims around the world, and the defense of Jerusalem is a Muslim duty. What's happening now, just today, the Israeli extremists, the Israeli colonizers, storming into the holy compound of Al Aqsa, into the old city of Jerusalem, attacking the Palestinian women, the Palestinian youth, the Palestinian citizens, and organizing musical concerts close to Al Aqsa Mosque in defense of 1 billion Muslims around the world, opening a museum a few meters away from Al Aqsa Mosque, intensifying the excavations under Al Aqsa Mosque in defiance of all Muslims. And really, it is disappointing and frustrating that all these measures by the Zionist regime are met with Arab and Muslim silence. Not only silence, even normalizing relations with this regime. So, any normalization with Israel without having the Palestinians enjoying all their rights, without having Jerusalem free from the Zionist regime, this is a stab in the back of not only the Palestinians, but all Arabs and Muslims around the world.
Yes, Jazakallah for that, Usama, and also to bring Dr. Firoz back into the discussion. Now, Dr. Firoz, you mentioned the treachery of the Muslim world, the treachery of the Arab world. Now, as Muslims, we are no strangers to treachery. We've seen this treachery happen in the past. We've seen this treachery even during the times of the fall of the Khilafah as well. And we know we can go back 100 years, the fall of the Khilafah, the entire aim, the Balfour Declaration, all of that was actually to gain a foothold into Palestine. And as Osama mentioned, we see the atrocities happening, Palestinians being wiped off the map. And we've seen how the map of the Zionist regime has been growing with settlements, with expansions all the time. So we are no strangers to treachery. And this treachery, to a large extent as well, when one looks at the British, when one looks at the French, the Balfour Declaration, to a large extent, the Sharif of Makkah, we know at that point in time, there was a direct Saudi involvement as far as treachery is concerned. And this treachery is now evident once again.
Most certainly. I think, right from the enthronement by the British of the Saud family, I mean, they betrayed each other. They were given £100,000 fiefdom. They were made to fight with each other, the Saud family and the Sharif family. And we know that, in order to placate Sharif, they were granted Iraq and Jordan. So the kingship is all illegitimate. And unfortunately, as you said, it has been going on. They are responsible for the fragmentation of the Ummah, and it is only because they were given the small fiefdoms that they allowed the Zionist entity known as Israel to come into the region. And they needed there, British first, the Americans second, in order to maintain their hegemony over the entire region. The normalization, and I think I must emphasize this point, which Brother Osama mentioned, that it is so important for them to normalize it in order to protect their own rule. And any talks with the Zionist entity, if it is not done within the resistance framework, where we talk about the rights of the Palestinian to the area, the rights of the Palestinian to return to their homeland, the full human rights values of those before 1988, 1948, 1967, all those must be in place. And unfortunately, we find that of the majority of the Arab regimes, and I must differentiate between the regimes and the people, we know that Egyptians, after so many decades of a relationship with Israel, are not in favor of any Israeli relationship. The same thing happens in Jordan. With the long border there, the Zionists are petrified of them. So if the Saudis think that they can, by normalizing relations with Israel, think that they can get the approval of the Ummah at large, are making a big mistake. If they think they can get more security by cohabiting with this monstrous Zionist regime, they are making a big mistake. But besides the Zionists, I think we must talk about the Palestinian Authority, who have been collaborating with the Zionist regime for such a long time, having a security arrangement with them. And I think Mahmoud Abbas is way past his stage, is way past a legitimate authority and conniving with the Saudi regime in order to get millions of dollars for himself and the authority. And I think that the Ummah must be well aware that it is not only the Saudis or the Emiratis or the Moroccans or the Sudanese, but it is in particularly treacherous of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas in particular, that is collaborating with the Zionist regime.
Yes, in fact, I'll get Osama to comment on the issue on the Palestinian Authority. But Osama, just following up from what Dr. Firoz is saying, is this about one family? Is this about the House of Saud, the Saudi family? Because we know Saudi Arabia is about the only country in the world that is named after a family. Is it about what this family wants? Because as Dr. Firoz mentions, that millions and billions of Muslims right across the entire world are not happy. They know, they see through this entire normalization process, and I'm sure people on the ground, even in Saudi Arabia, have major concerns as to what the Saudi monarchy and the Saudi regime is doing.
I think that we have an experience from the history of the relationships between the Arab world and Israel. And the key experience is the Egyptian one. As we know that Egypt signed a peace agreement with Israel Camp David Agreement in 1978. But if you go to Cairo or any Egyptian city and ask the Egyptian people, the public, about their opinion of Israel, they would call it an apartheid state, an occupation power. Palestine belongs to the Palestinian people, and there is no fruit of that agreement at all. No Egyptian citizen feels the fruit of the Camp David peace agreement with Israel. And the same applies to other countries. So when we talk about this relationship, we are not talking about individuals or certain persons' relationship. We are talking about a strategy, really, that Israel has been working on for many years, as I mentioned before, to subside the Palestinian cause and to erase the Palestinian people and the land of Palestine from the map, using its power and using the American and the Western support for its entity, as it employs their pressure on the different Arab governments in order to approach Israel without paying attention to the rights of the Palestinian people and the future of the Palestinian cause. But we have lessons from history that prove to everybody, whether a politician or an ordinary citizen, that without a free Jerusalem, without a free Palestine, without the right of the Palestinian refugees to return to their villages and their cities from which they were expelled during the Nakba in 1948 and during the different wars that Israel declared on the Palestinians, no peace could be felt in the region. And the Palestinians declared at the international chambers and at the different international forums that without recognizing the rights of the Palestinians and mainly the right of the Palestinian refugees to return, no peace would be achieved in the region. And the country that decides whether we can have peace or not is Palestine. And Palestine has paid a very expensive price still, and it offered a lot to achieve peace. But the one responsible for killing any opportunity for that peace is the Zionist regime. And as I said, we saw the Zionist Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu displaying the map, erasing Palestine from it.
Yes, and also, Firoz, looking at the global scenario that is playing out, and in terms of the United States in particular. Now, we know that the United States has been at the forefront and the center of a lot of these normalization relationships with Israel go, and we know we go back into the Trump era as well. And this is what the US wants. They want to see a formal, they want to see a smooth relationship between Saudi Arabia and Israel, whom they consider to be the two powerhouses in the Middle East, and also the influence that Saudi Arabia has in the region. So the geopolitics of the region that is playing out, and all of this for Saudi Arabia, for example, looking at obviously arms supplies to strengthen themselves from a military perspective, but also looking at Israel making inroads from an economic perspective, and also some of the other dangers, with Israel companies, because we know, we've learned that Israel companies are already operating within Saudi Arabia.
Very true. All of it is correct. I think America wants the strongest and the richest in the region so that it can continue its hegemony, so it can fulfill its own obligations. It needs money. And I think, Trump said it insultingly. And I saw MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, smiling when he was being insulted, which is shameless and absolute humiliation, when he said, that Saudi Arabia will not last 2 weeks without American weapons. So it needs Saudis, it needs the Israeli armament. But there is something that we need to consider. I know time is going to be run out, but I must bring into you. I went for a conference to Baghdad on the right of return of the Palestinians, and I was so encouraged that whatever the Saudi regime or the Emiratis or anybody else that is now so-called normalizing with Israel, they are making a big mistake because there is a rising power that is coming up that is not only not recognizing Israel. We know from the South African experience that we had peace only after a dialogue, reconciliation, and justice emerged. Now, there is no justice, as my brother Osama has said, until the Palestinians return to their home. And that is for everybody. Now, there is this rising group amongst the Palestinians of resistance without normalization. And it is causing panic within the regimes that are ruling there. They, Americans, need the Saudis in order to pay and dispense their money to the authority in order to subdue the legitimate resistance against the occupation. And that is the role of the Palestinian Authority. It is there to protect Israel. Saudi Arabia is there to protect Israel. And this is where they're making a mistake. That the rise of the resistance and the unity amongst all the factions, particularly in the West Bank, is coming to haunt the Israelis. Already a third of the Israelis have left. Another third have got dual citizenship. So, I mean, there is that fear that Israel, amongst the internal differences between the right wing and so called the extreme right wing, there is no other left wing left. So that is creating a tremor of fear within that. And inshallah, very soon, we will find the rise of resistance causing a complete change.
Yes, and Usama, it is obviously clear that Saudi Arabia is no friend of the Palestinian people because, we've seen Saudi Arabia, very little has been done for the Palestinian cause. And we've seen, despite claims by even the Saudi foreign minister saying that an independent state of Palestine is essential for normalization to take place. So using the Palestinians to normalize or to justify their normalization with Israel. And at the same time, we've seen how Saudi Arabia, over a period of time, they've been against the legitimate Palestinian resistance for a very, very long time. We've seen them even place severe restrictions on Palestinians, on Palestinian charities that are operating within the West Bank and the Gaza Strip as well. So, putting all of that into perspective, is Saudi Arabia really a friend of the Palestinians?
Look, we can't undermine the importance of Saudi Arabia to the Arab and Islamic world. You know that when we talk about Saudi Arabia, we are talking about Mecca, we are talking about Kaaba, which is the Qibla of all Muslims around the world. So this is very important. Millions, hundreds of millions of Muslims go every year to Saudi Arabia as pilgrims. This is the religious aspect, the economic aspect, which is very important. It is one of the richest Arab and Islamic countries in the world, and we know the importance of oil to human civilization, to all the world. So Saudi Arabia is occupying a very important status, and its position of the Palestinian cause is of high importance. And the Palestinians have hope that what we hear from the media and press releases from different institutions every day about the fact that they are getting very close to an agreement with Israel. We hope that this is not true and that Saudi Arabia won't sacrifice the rights of the Palestinian people in order to have an agreement with Israel upon the requirement of the American administration headed by Biden. The Saudis said many times that they are not going to have any agreement without having guarantees that the Palestinians are restoring their rights. We have hope. At the same time, we need to understand the position and the opinion of the Arab public, the Arab peoples. And we know that all Arabs, whether in Saudi Arabia or in Egypt or in any Arab country, they consider the cause of Palestine as their own cause. And they never abandon the Palestinians. They never give up Jerusalem because I said it from the beginning that Jerusalem is a Palestinian city, but it is a city for all Muslims at the same time. And giving up Jerusalem never be on the agenda of any Arab citizen, whether in Saudi Arabia or in any other Arab country.
Yes, but also Usama, I think on the same note that you are saying, and we understand that they are Khadim al-Haramain, they are obviously the custodians of the two holy places. But the third holiest site, and as you mentioned earlier on, you're speaking about Al-Quds and you're speaking about Masjid al-Aqsa, where very little is being said, very little is being done. And the one issue we know with Israeli companies that are operating in Saudi Arabia is in terms of security as well. And to the extent that they are providing security to the Saudis, even for the holy cities of Makkah and Medina, whether it's through intelligence or whatever, physically, they may not be there. So, as much as Saudi Arabia cares about the two holy sites of Makkah and Medina, we need to see the Saudis a lot more vocal on the issue of the third haram on Masjid al Aqsa.
For sure. We all know that the Arab and Muslim world is not in the best shape these days. And we know of the weakness and the fragility the Arab and Muslim countries are suffering from these days. We know that the Arab world is fully fragmented. We know the experience of Syria, Libya, Iraq, Yemen, and other Arab countries. So the situation of the Arab and Muslim world is, I can say that it is the worst in decades, really. So what we have as Palestinians is hope all the time. Hope that the Arab public, the Arab people will have their saying. And we are sure when they have their saying, of course, they are going to say no for Zionism, no for the Zionist regime, and Israel has no right to exist on the Palestinian land. We know how Israel was invented by the colonial power of Britain and the colonial power of the United States. It was invented at the expense of the Palestinian people. 550 Palestinian villages were set to fire in 1948. Tens of thousands of Palestinians were murdered and injured. More than 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from their houses, from their villages, from their farms, and they were turned into refugees scattered around the world. So we never give up hope as Palestinians that our cause is supported by Arabs and Muslims as peoples. I'm not talking about the elites here. And we know the difference between the public and elitism. We count hope on the Arab people and on the pro-justice people around around the world. Because if we give up hope, then we give up our right to exist, really. That's why we count hope on the Arab people and on the activists who support justice, who support the human rights. At the same time, the Palestinians will continue their struggle regardless of the difficulties and the setbacks that they are going through. We have hope as long as we have people like you in South Africa who always declare their unlimited support for the Palestinian people and their opposition to the Israeli apartheid.
Yes, Firoz, just looking at Saudi Arabia and assuming that this is what what Osama is saying, that there is concern. Obviously, there is concern for the people of Palestine, but to what extent is this concern? And I'd like to take a step back. In 2002, the Arab Peace Initiative that was proposed by Saudi Arabia at that point in time called for two states for Palestine, one for the Jews and one for the other for Palestine in the land occupied in 1967. Now, here again, there's a dilemma because we know a lot of land has been stolen from the people of Palestine. Is this normalization going to result in still over two-thirds of Palestine being given to the Zionist regime?
I think you make a very important point. But I must emphasize that there is no there's a danger of placing any hope on the current Saudi regime. This is a man who has, remember Khashoggi, they chopped him up and they put his body into acid and they dissolved it. He was a monster, even a pariah in the Western world. This is a man who has caused 15 million Yemenis to starve, 25 million population, and he bombed and continued to bomb them until he found that he cannot defeat them. He is the man who kidnapped Saad Hariri from Lebanon and kept him in Saudi Arabia and brought up great deal of destabilization in Lebanon. And it goes on to Jordan and it goes on to Sudan and a nefarious role in many other Arab countries. So I must emphasize that the Saudis are using the position as Khadamain of Haramain and causing a great deal of strife for the Muslim Ummah all over the world. So there is an illegitimate regime here that is causing a great deal of problems for the Muslims. I do not have much hope in this particular Saudi regime, and in fact, there's a great deal of harm that will emanate from them. Yes, the Saudis are important, but not in this particular regime. It is critical for the Palestinians to improve and, in fact, carry on with their resistance. It is the only way that they will change. And I have hope in that. The solidarity movement throughout the world is very important. As I mentioned, that in South Africa, there was first justice before dialogue and before peace came. And that is a precondition to peace. The Saudi Arabia regime and the backstabbing, the history of tragedy, of treachery against the Muslim Ummah must be noted. The Oslo Accord is there and buried. The two-state solution is there and buried. The only hope is to eliminate Zionism, whose ambition is not only Palestine, it is parts of Syria, it is even parts of Jordan and Saudi Arabia. That's what they want. Dominating the entire region at the behest of the Americans and the British to pummel Palestine. I have no hope that this regime will bring about peace, and it is only through resistance that we will achieve the complete dismantling of the Zionist movement.
Yes, Osama, just to understand how critical is this for the formation of an independent Palestinian state, but not under the present circumstances. And I mentioned to Firoz the 2002 Arab proposals that went through with regards to the two-state and their acceptance that you should have two separate states. But when one just looks at the anomalies in these proposals alone, and I'm sure this is of major concern to you and also to the people of Palestine.
First, we need to understand that the Israeli successive governments, mainly the current government, which is formed of the extremist right, the Israeli officials who deny the right of the Palestinians to exist. And we saw today and yesterday how Israeli settlers were roaming around in the streets of the old city of Jerusalem, spitting at the Palestinian Christians and spitting at the churches in Jerusalem. So the Zionist regime, the Israeli colonizers, are not only promoting and entrenching their occupation of Palestine, but they want to erase the Palestinians, whether Muslims or Christians. Some of them are attacking Al Aqsa Mosque, attacking the Muslim worshippers inside Al Aqsa Mosque, and others of them are attacking the churches and the Christian worshippers. So when we talk about any peace initiative, like the Arab Peace Initiative, or any other proposal that was presented by other parties, the Chinese Initiative for Peace, for example, the Russian Initiative for Peace, all that are meaningless and have no importance at all once Israel is determined to continue with its colonial scheme, with its scheme of like expanding its settlements in every part of the occupied West Bank, continuing its siege on the Gaza Strip, the siege that started in 2006 and is still going on until this moment, and at the same time uh, isolating Jerusalem from its Palestinian sphere. So Israel does not want peace. And if you come and visit Palestine, you are going to see how it is building a very advanced infrastructure for the Israeli settlements that are built on the Palestinian land occupied in 1967. So all the indicators and all the signs and all the measures and policies that we have today show that Israel does not have any intention to allow the Palestinians to have their statehood or to enjoy independence and freedom. Israel is an apartheid Zionist regime. That is the only definition fits into the current situation we have today.
Yes, Firoz, and apart from the global political landscape and the global dynamics that are playing out, and also the regional politics in that part of the world, this is also about personalities. Because you spoke about MBS, but also looking at someone like Netanyahu, looking at Ben Gvir, looking at that entire right wing, ultra right wing Israeli government and the personalities that are actually shaping this Israeli government, and many of them with disastrous consequences. And we see the situation getting worse. So it's also about personalities and what these personalities are promoting. And the key issue here is with normalization. Can one actually work with personalities like that?
And from the very outset, whether it was the Labour Party or any other party in Israel, they call them the Dove Party and the Hawks and so on. All of them have one basic principle. It is to colonize the entire region of Palestine and Syria and Saudi and Jordan for the Zionist regime. So, yes, right wing, it's terrible now, ultra right wing, terrible. But they marketed even Yitzhak Rabin as eventually a dove. But he is the one who said, break the bones of the children, the Palestinians, and he did it. Shimon Peres, the laughing, smiling man, he is the one that introduced uh, the nuclear weapons into Israel. Ehud Barak, the whole lot of them are like Ariel Sharon. Some smile more than the others, but they're all right wing and they're all Zionists. As Osama mentioned, it is their purpose of having a apartheid settler colonial regime in Palestine without the Palestinian people. So they want to evict them all. I mean, you know, the two-state solution, and you mentioned the Saudi Arab initiative in 2002. If we recognize Israel even on 1 inch of the soil, we are recognizing the genocide that they've committed and legitimizing it and giving it an option to live in our land. Again, our foreign minister is in Gaza today. She's gone to occupied Palestine, Naledi Pandey. And I hope she sees some of the crimes that they have been committing. Because remember, if we say that it is an apartheid regime, it is a regime declared by the United Nations as a regime that is committing crimes against humanity. And anybody that recognizes Israel as an apartheid regime has certain obligations under international law to take actions and isolate the regime of Israel. And that is what Israel is afraid of. So, without Israel's occupation of Jerusalem, and Brother Sama mentioned it there is no Jerusalem without the Temple of Solomon built in the place of where Masjid al-Aqsa is. So this is something we need to bear in mind, that people like uh, uh, MBS and those who have so-called normalized the regime of Israel are accepting the hegemony and the dominance and the control of Masjid al-Aqsa, the third most holy shrine of the Muslim Ummah. And therefore, it is the obligation of every single Muslim to show and express their solidarity with the Palestinians in their resistance, any kind of resistance, including armed resistance against the occupation, and to isolate and, in fact, condemn any Arab regime or any other Muslim or non-Muslim regime that wants to establish their kind of ties with the Zionist occupation known as Israel.
Yes, Osama, just want to spend a few minutes talking about the Palestinian Authority and its position on this normalization. Now, we know to a large extent the Palestinian Authority is reliant on Saudi funding to keep it going. And we've seen even recently where we had a guest out of Al Quds, an archaeologist, and she made mention of this as well, where she says the PA is largely reliant on Saudi funding. And she even mentioned that the people in Al Quds are basically on their own. Now, given the state of the Palestinian economy, given the reliance that the PA has on Saudi Arabia to keep it going as well. Where does this actually place the Palestinian Authority? Because again, as Firoz mentioned earlier on, he spoke about the treachery of the Palestinian Authority in this whole normalization deal.
Yeah. Uh, First of all, when we talk about the Palestinian economy, we are talking about the economy of a country that is fully colonized, fully occupied. I want to give you an example. For example, the taxes that the Palestinian Authority government is collecting are not collected by the Palestinian government directly, but Israel collects the taxes from the Palestinian merchants
Mm.
on the Palestinian goods coming from outside into Palestine, and it takes like a commission of that, about 2% of the total amount of taxes, and gives that to the Palestinian Authority, the rest of the revenues. And it cuts a large percentage of the tax revenues, uh, depriving the Palestinian government of the right to have access to these revenues on the pretext that the Palestinian government is paying money for the Palestinian families of the Palestinian prisoners and to the Palestinian families of the Palestinian martyrs. So Israel is punishing the Palestinian government for that by deducting from the Palestinian tax revenues that are collected by Israel. Why collected by Israel? Because the Palestinian Authority has no control at all over any crossing or over any border. That when it comes to the Palestinian economy and why the Palestinians depend on international and Arab financing support. But we can't ignore the fact that many Arab governments stopped funding the Palestinians since many years. And that's why the Palestinian employees of the public sector have not received their complete salaries for about 2 years. Why? Because of the economic situation and because of uh, the Arab governments and the international community in general reduction of financial support for the Palestinians. And some governments froze their support completely. They don't pay one penny for the Palestinian government. So we can't say that the Palestinian Authority position of what's going on now with regard to normalizing relations with Israel is based on the fiscal support that it receives from the Arab government. And President of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, declared in the United Nations General Assembly session weeks ago that elusive those who think that peace is possible in the Middle East without enabling the Palestinian people to have their rights, emphasizing the right of the Palestinian refugees to return. So the situation is complicated really, and it's sometimes difficult to understand how things are going on and how things are getting so interconnected. So yes, the Palestinian economy is adherent to the Israeli occupation economy. Israel is controlling everything. You know that Gaza is under the siege, and you can't even get the basic needs to Gaza without Israel allowing that. The Arab funds almost frozen. The European Union reduced its support for the Palestinians. The United States stopped its support since the government of Donald Trump, uh, and the economic situation is very complicated, and God knows how the Palestinians manage to run their everyday life.
Well, definitely, Osama. In fact, and this is a major concern as well. But Firoz, just talking about the Palestinians as a collective, and we've been talking about the Palestinian Authority, but also looking at, and Osama mentioned Gaza as well, to look at the position of the Palestinians in Gaza against this normalization, to look at the position of Hamas with regards to this as well. And I just need your thoughts, on the Palestinians as a collective. And let us not forget those that are in Al Quds, those that are in Jerusalem, and they have their own challenges as well. So, this, what does this actually mean for Palestinians as a collective?
I think it's an extremely difficult situation for the Palestinians. We must not forget that besides the collaboration of Mahmoud Abbas with Israel and the strangulation siege on Gaza, it is also carried out by Egypt. They hold the border. Recently, we had some brothers from Gaza that visited us, and five of the 10 men delegation that was, sorry, 10 people delegation. One of them was a sister. She was denied entry into South Africa. And this is actually when we met some of the people from the South African government that we expressed our confusion, that we understand the relationship between the PLO and the liberation movements in South Africa. There was a great deal of cooperation, but the Fatah movement, the PLO of then, is not the Fatah or the PLO that exists at the moment. The embassies here are representing the Palestinian Authority. And this is something that we are trying to persuade the government to look at all the Palestinians as a whole, whether Islamic Jihad or whether it's Hamas or the PFLP or the other groups as well. They have an equal or perhaps a more representative stake of the Palestinian people than the Palestinian Authority. So the funding that is going through to the Palestinian Authority is for one and one reason only, so that they remain the eyes and the ears and the torturers of the Zionist entities of the Palestinian people. They carry out the arrest at the behest of the Israelis and the Americans. And unfortunately, even our government ministers have such deep ties, understandably, with the PLO and the Fatah of that time. We need to explain to them it is not the same, that the Palestinians are now far more represented by other groups as well. And we must not forget the role played by Egypt, the role played by Jordan, and of course Saudi Arabia now, and the Emiratis on the plight of the Palestinian people. It is extremely sad. But having said that, there is, as I mentioned right at the beginning, a movement that has developed, like the Lion's Den, and the cooperation between the various resistance movements that has caused a great deal of fear within the Zionist regime. And I have a great deal of hope, not only in the West Bank, but in Gaza. And with our help, South Africa is the people, and generally the people all over the world, really look towards the heroic resistance of the Palestinians. And with Allah's help, they will be successful, inshallah.
Inshallah. And back to Osama. Osama, just I know we've been talking about Saudi Arabia. We've been talking about the United Arab Emirates, Morocco, Egypt, and the like as well. But also another a major player in the Muslim world is Turkey. And the recent G20 summit, we saw President Erdogan together with Netanyahu. And we know Turkey has got some sort of a relationship with Israel, although not the normalization. But Turkey flies in and out of Tel Aviv, Turkish Airlines, and they have got an economic relationship of some sort. And just to get your thoughts on the Turkish position, because one cannot ignore Turkey because it is quite a major player in the Muslim world.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, as Palestinians, we reject, as I said from the beginning, any normalization with the Zionist regime unless the people of Palestine enjoy all their rights, mainly the right of return and free Jerusalem. So any relationship that supports Israel and strengthens Israel is, of course, a step against the people of Palestine and against the possibility of having Palestine free from the fetters and the yoke of the Zionist Israeli regime. But can the Palestinians dictate on any government not to normalize with Israel, not to have economic and trade relations with Israel? Of course, the Palestinians can't dictate on that. But these governments and the Muslim peoples, as Turkey is a Muslim country, need to realize that their relationship with Israel is entrenching the Israeli occupation of Palestine. And we as Palestinians reject such relationship because since the beginning, we say that any relationship between any Arab or Muslim country with Israel must be conditioned on Israel's recognition of the rights of the Palestinian people and on allowing the Palestinians to have their state, their freedom, and above all is justice, the concept of justice. So, yes, as I said, the situation is not in the best shape. The Palestinians are in a very complicated, very difficult condition. Arabs and Muslims are fragmented, and Israel is making use of that in addition to the benefit that it gets from its relationship with the first power on this planet, the United States.
Well, let's see what develops. Osama, Nazzal, and Dr. Firoz Osman. To both of you, Jazakallah, we thank you for taking time out and being part of this panel discussion right here on Salam Media this evening. So to both of you, we say Jazakallah khair. We wish you well. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Well, that brings us to the end of part one of this evening's edition of Wednesday Nights with myself, Inayat Wadi. And when we come back, we're going to be paying tribute to the late Aziz Bahad, rahimahumullah.